Here in my beautiful city of Hyderabad, and I welcome all the people here who are watching us, who are with us in person as well. And right now we will be discussing the book Hijab. It is written by Guruprasad Kaginele. It's translated from Kannada by Mr. Pavan Rao. And I would also like to welcome with me Professor Veda Sharan. He is from EFLU. He will be in conversation with Mr. Sri Pavan Rao. And I would also like to give a warm welcome to our young panelist, Miss Monika, here today.
While we wait for Mr. Sharan to start.
Okay. Okay, while we wait for Mr. Sharan and the others to join us, I was fortunate enough to get the copy of the book and read it earlier before coming to the session today. And there are some thoughts that I had written on my notes to discuss and talk about the book. It kind of really moved me, and also the book talks about migration, lives of indigenous people through the setting of a community hospital in a small town somewhere in the US. It is depicting Indian doctors living abroad. With a clinical and a bit sterile style of writing, the author very deftly makes the reader understand the underlying concept of various community and race issues. While one is engrossed in the plot in the foreground, but subconsciously one is also thinking in the background the big questions on racism, feminism, equality, equanimity, and politics. As one discovers this extremely complex new world scenario where one seeks their true identity, this book really made me go beyond the layers of societal conditioning and structures to see the point of view of the author. And also, I would like to say the translated work has been done so deftly that it has really kept the culture of the Indian culture of the Sanghali tribes given in the book, of the indigenous community. And I think that is a huge, huge work that the translator has done while translating the book, keeping the whole culture and the ethos of the book. And Monika is here with us. Monika, would you like to add something or ask a question that you wanted to ask about the book, or talk something about the book that really stood out for you?
Yes. Thank you, Samna, for giving me this opportunity. And, sorry. Okay. Thank you. And first of all, good morning to all of the dignitaries present here. I'm fortunate to be part of this program as a young panelist. My name is Miss Monika Paniru. I'm working as a junior assistant in irrigation department. Hijab, a book by Guruprasad Kaginele, translated from Kannada by Pavan Rao. And this book deals with, generally I have put some notes on this book, so I welcome, sir.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. Welcome.
So hijab means the parda the Muslims wear on the head, right, sir? Thank you. Yeah, it deals with a difficult birth given by a Muslim community who belongs to an African state, and so the novel revolves around 3 doctors from Karnataka practicing at a hospital in the small town of Amoka in Maharashtra. As they bide their time to get green cards, and expected series event places them in the middle of a storm of identity politics. A young Sangala, an imaginary African Muslim nation, immigrant woman's refusal to deliver her child through C-section, going against doctors' advice, unveils stubborn religious and cultural differences and racial prejudice that do not quite lose themselves in the so-called melting pot. the process also shakes the doctor rather smug notions of their own selves. So I come across so many things in these books, like how it's difficulty for a woman to come overtake all these customs and rituals they have imbibed with, and I'm a bit nervous actually.
That's
to
okay.
be
That's okay, Monica.
Thank you.
Thank you so
sir.
much for the insight on the book.
Yeah.
And if you have a specific question that you would like to pick up now, or maybe towards the end of the conversation, do let me know.
So end of the conversation I'll pick up. Thank you for
Okay.
the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you. And now over to Professor Veda Sharan. Sir, would you like to? I think yeah.
Good morning to all the distinguished members here. And I thank my Vice Chancellor and Mr. Ajay Kumar and Dr. Sanjay Chopra for having me here. I'm most grateful to you all, sir, for your kindness. And I think it's my privilege. I should say that if great power brings great responsibility, I think this is one wonderful show of the responsibility that the great power has brought about, in the sense that we have called so many different people to develop an interest in literature or further their interest in literature. So thank you very much for this amazing venture. And I think the name itself, The Valley of Words, is a very, very fascinating thing. If you look at the technical term for the book, it's called the gutter, the line between the division between pages here. But the valley is a much more romantic and much more beautiful word for the differences in the part that divides the two pages of the sides of the book. So when I read this novel, The Hijab, I was very fascinated by the title itself. It was so simple and so stark. And the cover design was also very interesting. And I must say that as a Hyderabadi, I'm very proud of this city, which is so liberal and so very accommodating in its in welcoming everything that that has to do with the arts, especially when you compare it to some very traditional cities like Chennai. For example, we have events-less drama that was not allowed in Chennai because of the title, but we had absolutely no problems in staging it here in Hyderabad, with all the title intact and all the dramatists, all the actors doing exactly what they wanted. And I mean, the way that they wanted to present the drama. I'm sure you must have heard of all this, of the drama itself. And the hijab is, I think, in the same line as that. I have a few things to say about it, beginning with the cover. It's a very well-designed book. And I think the color and the title itself, I wish to come back to it a little later. But I will get down directly into the book. And I'll just speak about it for a few minutes about what I thought of this book. I think it's a tremendous mixture of the personal and the professional. And it goes on to show a clash of cultures that happens there. And it has a really good sprinkling of humor and insights with humor. For example, the writer points out that great people never bow down their heads, but we enter the world head down. And that is something really, we begin in humility, but we grow up to be something else. many people. And so this idea of fate is a very interesting thing. And it's a Greek term, as you all know. The Greeks distinguished between fate and destiny. Fate was, for the Greeks, what happened to a society as a whole. And destiny is what happens to an individual. Unfortunately, we don't maintain this distinction that the Greeks were so very careful about. But however, it basically assumes a godless society, because fate is supposed to be blind, whereas God is supposed to be just, and fate and God are mutually exclusive. And here, the role that God plays, the religion plays, is a very interesting role that these things have. And if you look at the word religion, it derives from the Latin religare, which means to unite or to bind. And in many ways, it's a very ironic term these days, I think. But at least it's inspiring and it tells us what to look forward for. So when we start the novel, the narrator hero has a very long name, and it is shortened to Guru for the convenience of the Americans. And that's a really wonderful thing, because a guru is one who is literally someone who dispels darkness. And there's a lot of darkness around in the form of superstition, in the form of the beliefs that people have. However, towards the end of the novel, we see that people live and learn a lot of things. And in that sense, the novel is a very, very optimistic one. And it shows very successfully the triumph of human resilience, the triumph of human determination over a lot of difficulties and problems and so on. I think the word hijab has a lot of layers of meaning, in the sense that it covers a lot of things, in both senses of the term cover, in the sense of hiding and also in the sense of including. And hijab includes and excludes at the same time. It includes people who belong to the culture that wears the hijab. It excludes the people who don't belong to the culture, and it walls in and walls out a lot of people. And in that sense, it's a very, very interesting and fascinating thing. The novel, again, is a look at how human beings cope within these things. We have these very frightening things that we talk about, such as female genital mutilation and the problems it causes during their lifetime. And that's a huge issue and a problem there. I think it's very rampant in the northern part of Africa. Whether it is religion or culture is a debatable thing. And sometimes you feel that the author takes a sort of tremendous importance that he assigns to fate. That reminded me of Hardy, Thomas Hardy, where a small event pans out, cascades into a huge event that involves the whole nation. And then it sort of cools down towards the end, but that's a very interesting thing. I thought we could ask the author about these things. And there are a lot of puns in the novel as I read it, and it shows a very huge variety of things around in language play and so on. Sometimes I feel it's a little demanding on the non-Indian readers. The book is published by Simon Schuster, which is an international publishing house. And when it goes to foreign nations, we have, for example, the chapter number 23, which is titled Gulab Gang. I think this is a very Indian kind of term. Yeah. It refers to a gang of women. I think in North India. I haven't heard of them in South India.
Yes, The Gulab
the Gulab gang, who
yes.
would arm themselves with long sticks and beat up men who demanded dowry or in some way harassed their wives and women. And this is the Gulab gang, and the title just there sits at the top of the chapter, but it doesn't really occur again in the book itself.
Yeah.
And I think the author expects the audience to make the connection. And I also think that the author is trying to show that the Gulab gang is a universal phenomenon in the sense that it is the American people who come and demand the rights for their women and so on. And so that I thought was a very interesting thing, but it has no mercy for the non-Western reader who is not aware of the Gulab gang. So that was a very...
I would also like to bring in Mr. Pavan Rao into the conversation now, Professor.
Yeah, sure. That would be nice. I just want to say one or two lines about the translator.
Yes, yes.
The translator has been very competent, and I think there have been one or two small slip-ups. For example, he says 22 Magnum. Actually, it is .22 Magnum. That's a technicality that I think we should be very careful about. There are one or two Indianisms there, but on the whole, I think the translation was really superb, and it brought out the essence of the novel. And I must congratulate both the writer for conceiving of a wonderful novel and the translator for bringing it home to the non-Kannada speakers.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Great revelation for non-Kannada speakers like me.
Yes.
After reading the book, he has actually maintained the cultural ethos of the language and the place over there. Yeah.
Yes.
The cultural and ethos of Kannada and Kannada-speaking people. And even if he's mentioned Bangalore in some places, we can also understand the cultural ethos of Kannada-speaking people in the book very well, in spite of them living abroad and living in the United States. And also, here's one question for Mr. Pavan Rao. If he could, give us some insight on the fate and destiny that is mentioned very clearly in the background of the setting that's happening in the book and the story.
First of all, my thanks for for the kind comment made by Professor Sharan and yourself. So, if I understand your question right, are you referring to the one on the what exactly are you referring to when you're talking about superstitions,
Thing of
right?
the
Is
book,
that
yes, yes, the superstition part, and towards the end as well, when certain things are coming up, when you have the same name of the protagonist, when the girl with the same name also comes in, and then the child that is born is also kept the same name of the first child who was supposed to be belonging to the terrorist organization. So that kind of also brought a lot of elements of the fate and destiny part that will again foretell their future and how the story will be played out after that.
Right. It's essentially talking about their whole belief system in terms of right, starting from the Caesarean sections and how they look at it, how the women are essentially viewed by the Sangala community, and also as it appears in one part of the novel where the Sangalis are to look at their women as not only their uh, places where they make babies, but also they look at them as with each of these babies that are made, there is a certain monetary incentive involved, and these kinds of things. So this is all kind of one gets dovetailed into another, and so there is this whole process, this whole chain of events that happen due to this. So have I answered your question, or?
wanted to basically ask you about the part where the 2 years later, and when they finalize their green card as well, in spite of all the hurdles that they have gone through, the doctors in the first part of the novel, and also I was kind of amazed at how things played out for them after the period of 2 years. And like I mentioned again, when certain situations were replayed for them, but in a different sense, because I kind of found it very, a little bit of humorous and a sarcastic humor, where that young girl with the same name of the first patient in the story comes and asks for interpreter for herself this time. And also how he immediately gives her a pregnancy test to be done. And also towards the end, when Nusrat has her child again, it was like a whole scenario, like a replay of what has happened in the last few years, happening again towards the end of the book.
Yeah, I think so. Essentially, what the book is trying to do here at this point is uh, kind of, reversing back the clock, so to speak. Meaning, there is it kind of tracks the progress of their women and their thinking and how they're kind of moving the clock back. So this is kind of the the high level, a macro level view of what's happening. So, but at a micro level view, it's more about the woman, her body, and her freedom of expression. So it deals with these things.
Yes, yes, absolutely, I agree at that point over there. So I think understanding the little bit of that feminism and the consent part, and also giving that choice to women, and towards the end how those women are making those choices for themselves. And also the protagonist, one of the female doctors, is doing that for herself as well, while the patients are doing that for them as well at the same time. So that was kind
Right,
of
right.
a duality which was shown, and it and very clearly mentions how things are happening in the foreground, in the background as well.
Yes, and also if you look at how the writer has nicely, kind of ended the novel. It's based on those four young women, the young women's group that actually come forward to get a cesarean done, C-section done. So that's one way he has ended it, and that's really a very hopeful and an optimistic ending to an otherwise what would be a more depressing start to the story, and then it kind of uh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. I said, like as Professor mentioned in the beginning, that the novel starts as a very dark. The setting is a very dark setting over there.
Dark
So
setting,
towards the
yes.
end, the author does give us a little hopeful and an optimistic end as well.
Hmm. Right, that's right. It's kind of a it was meant to kind of reinforce this kind of optimism, so it's really a novel of optimism, even though it kind of comes across on a superficial level as something that's dark, as you said, but it's not really a dark novel. It's more an optimistic, positive novel. So it's something that people can relate to, in the sense that especially women, and especially women in uh, very male dominant societies. So this is, in that sense, it's a number one, a hopeful novel. Number two, it's a very women centric novel, in the sense, well, we have other characters like Mohammed or any of the other male characters, but it's really the women who are the middle and front and back, right through the novel. So they form the whole uh, the spine of the novel, really.
And how is it for you as a translator to bring in that element as well? Since the narrator is a male and the author is also a male, and then translating the women's work with so much of compassion, I would say, and bringing the whole layer over there very well and very deftly done. And what was your thought process at that point of time when you went through the book and translated it?
Yeah, when I read the book, I think that was one thing that jumped right out of the page for me. On how this novel is constructed and where the real strengths of the novel is, and and who the real protagonists are, even though it might come across as something different. These are the women characters are all the real strong ones.
Yes, yes. Yes, because in the beginning, when the whole situation is arising, we don't see the women as very strong characters, and I like the growth that happens eventually towards the
Right.
end of the book.
Suicidal as well.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Suicidal, yeah.
And also it brings in to a point the narratives that was mentioned in the novel itself, that most of the news was present in the social media and not in the national news in the country over there. So we could also say that was a narrative built around to mention that the women are committing those suicides, and with just a few cases, and how they were building up
Yeah.
the narrative for
Yes,
that, and
exactly.
how the women took control of it after some time,
True.
even after that narrative was built.
Right.
I have finish.
Yes,
Observation.
Yeah, I have a kind of a psychological angle that I'd like you to look at. Now, a religion is supposed to be ritualistic, and the doctor's own procedures are also very firmly fixed. And do you think that this kind of fixed, familiar routine grants some kind of psychological support for the people? I mean, why do you think, does this situation arise for you at all?
No, I think the way I look at it is, it's purely a clash of science versus religion. I mean, to put it in a very rough sense, in a rough manner. So the medical science has its own way of doing things, and which may or may not come into right play with what the religious practices are. In fact, just to kind of give a slight additional info on this, or an additional insight into this, is here in America. I mean, you obviously, you guys are quite aware of this. So when we go to a doctor or a physician's office, they take a lot of trouble in terms of identifying and respecting the patient's religious beliefs. So whether it is in the food that they serve the patient, or in trying to treat their whatever is the religious um, marks or religious items that they own when they come into the hospital. So be it a Gnopavita or a Janam. When you've seen this, right? I mean, with people. And then there is, when it comes to women, their Mangal Sutra. So these are kinds of things that they ask you, is it okay, or do you need to keep this somewhere? So they're very extra sensitive to these kinds of things in the US. So I think that's part of that narrative construct there is kind of based upon this too.
The fact that towards the end, the women reconcile with the medical procedures that were supposed to be taboo for them later on shows that there's no inherent clash between religion and medicine. How do you respond to that?
Well, yes and no. There wasn't any inherent clash, but then if you really look at it, in terms of how um, things progress on a day-to-day basis in the novel, it's essentially the doctors trying to do something good for the women, and the women. Well, in fact, if it's implied that they're menfolk who actually, hold them from.
We are not able to hear you, Mr. Pavan. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
So what does the hijab signify for you as a translator, and if you have any access to the writer, uh, could you throw some light on that? I mean, since it's the
Yeah,
overarching
sure.
idea
Sure.
of the book.
No,
Question clear to you.
What happening?
no.
Something is happening.
My question was about the hijab as an overarching, unifying theme of the novel. How do you view it? Is it liberating? Is it imprisoning? Or is it a mix of all these things?
I think it's. In fact, I was. That is a very good point that you made. You know, so I would say it's basically differentiating. More in terms of definitely not inclusive. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. So did I answer your question?
I think you mentioned that it is differentiating and not inclusive. Is that, if I'm correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And also for me, I think it is more something that is bringing across the real problem like a symbol more than anything else. It is bringing up the whole issue that is underlying as a symbol over there. And I would feel differentiating in a factor where people are able to differentiate between what is actually happening than what is shown to other people. Was my understanding when I went through the book.
What's no, yeah, I mean, from a purely considered as a metaphor, yes. I mean, that's how it is, because if you uh, look at the narrative, there are portions of the novel where there's a clear involvement with third party operators like Dr. Mohammed or some of their own men from their own community. So yeah.
I just put some more.
Dr. Pavan, I think avoiding stereotyping characters in the novel was a very big issue for you, I'm sure. How did you negotiate this, tend to this? How did you avoid this kind of stereotyping that so easily you could have fallen into?
Yeah, I mean that's true. That's very true. Uh, it was. I mean, we that's one of the reasons why we did not kind of the novel. If you see, the novel kind of uh, is at a more um, for want of a better word, more at a very secular world, in the sense it only deals with medicine practices and those kinds of things, and not into the religious world at all. So you don't, for instance, see any kind of religious characters other than the ones that are hinted. Even Dr. Muhammad is more of um, a cultural leader rather than religious leader, and so the whole thing is really a more secular world there.
That you make there when you come to this Martin Luther King, and you ask this question: who would name their son Martin Luther King? I thought that was surprising, especially for a South Indian to ask that question, because we have a Stalin ruling a part of our country.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good good observation. Yeah, I mean, if you really look at it that way, I mean, there's so many other places also you can see some of those things. But yes, I think you have a good point there. Yeah, I mean,
I was also intrigued
quite
by this title that you have, where the river joins the ocean. Is it some kind of salvation that you are looking at, especially in a very Hindu context? I think it's the Atman joining the Paramatman or something like that. I mean, what is the idea behind the title that you gave this here? Of course, it's there, it's clear in the title itself, but could you throw any personal, some of your personal views, if you could tell us? That would be very nice.
no, I don't think that there was. I don't think there was any such bigger, spiritual meaning behind it. So
Yeah, okay.
I think we have a question coming up from Monika over here.
Please, go ahead.
Monika, you have a question for Mr.
Yes,
Pavan?
yes. So here in the very first page of the book, you have mentioned that don't search in Google for Sangala meaning. It's an imaginary tribe you mentioned. So what actually mean by Sangala? Is any tribe mean?
no, Sangala is actually it's a fictitious name. So there's really, I mean, it does not have any basis, to where it comes from. So
Any
it's
mystical background?
well, this answer might surprise you. This name we pulled out of some show, that was in C-SPAN, or I mean, one of those channels, TV channels here in the States, where a particular prince comes from a country called Sangara. So we thought, why don't we just use that name? So that's how it kind of
Interesting.
came up.
And
So it was
also
more,
convinced
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Something that's convenient and so
in spite of being the town being fictitious and that whole tribe being fictitious, there are certain issues that have been very close to reality as well, that have been brought up and displayed in the book for the reader. And the narrative that is built around it has been pretty thought-provoking for all of us. Anything that you would like
Yeah,
to
Dr.
add?
Pavan, yeah, I think that's a very interesting point that you made. I just want to look at this very cliched idea that the United States is a melting pot, and our culture would be more like a multi-layered cake. Since our people are there in a melting pot, how do they cope with this kind of how shall we say, the erasure of identity, or at least the United States tries to do that. When you say e pluribus unum, out of the many one.
Yeah. So actually the fact is that many of immigrant Indians there, or for that matter, many of the other Asian demographics too, we all live in a kind of a bubble, like a, so which, going back to your metaphor of a multi-layered cake, right? So each community living in its own bubble can make it a multi-layered cake. That's kind of how I would put that. I mean,
What is
just
the
to answer
multi-layered
your
cake? What is your, I mean, do you have a preference between these two things?
I would say no, I don't have a preference because each has its own strengths and desirables.
Yeah, okay. I just want to come back to this cover a bit. I think it's a very interesting kind of cover. It's very dark, and it also is very vaginal in its design, and it shows a sort of volcanic heat and intensity behind in that. Why did you choose this kind of cover? Because it's vertical, I thought it was more vaginal than anything else.
Yeah, I think your second observation is right. Professor Sharan, your second observation is right.
I mean, how do you see that? Do you see the vagina as a source of power or revolution, or what is it like? And what precisely does it mean to you?
In the context of this novel, I think it's really a source of power because that's where the women start expressing their resistance or their rebellions. Then that's where also it's a good pathway for the Sangala community towards a more economic profitability. So, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
yes.
hear you.
Thank you so much
Yes.
for the description, and I think very aptly, a very apt question towards the end of our conversation.
Yes, yes, sir.
I think it describes the whole book and the whole conversation around the book very, very well. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you,
so
Sharan.
much.
And
Thank you,
so
sir,
much,
for
Mr.
being with
Pavan.
us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah, thanks.